March 26, 2023. It has been quite some time since that intro died almost years ago. Whilst I have moved on from what took place at that time, to be honest I haven't moved past it. But now is not the time for our faith to waver, now is the time for reflection. We must look inside ourselves, seeking the reality amidst the constant nightmares. Finding the with theorizing and collaborating to come to a logical conclusion. This is the way. Let us now look back at what we discovered, only then can we look forward. Have faith, my friends, and hit that subscribe button.
When I think about doing theory videos over the last few months, since lockdown really, I've struggled to find a game that I really want to explore and go in depth on. You know, we had the Sally Face videos that done really well that you guys really enjoyed, had the Little Misfortune videos and Frambo as well. But when I want to write, I really want to be as immersed and engaged in that game and in that series as possible. And whenever I think about writing a theory, at least at the moment, the game I keep coming back to is the Faith series, the Unholy Trinity. Currently, chapters 1 and 2 have released, with a demo for chapter 3 also out on Steam, produced by indie developer Airdorf. I was enamoured when I first started playing this game. Its use of the retro Atari era style graphics, coupled with the deeply unsettling soundtrack and voice effects.
Do you think my face is pretty? I have to finish what I started. She's my priest.
Made it perfect for the 1980s story setting of the real-life satanic scare in the US of the same time, for which paranoia about devil worshipping, witchcraft and occult practices were all too prominent. The use of strange satanic symbols, unsettling imagery and some good game mechanics really made this game stand out for me, with subsequent chapters going even further in terms of creative game mechanics to keep things fresh. With the full 3 chapters set to release this year, I want to explore Faith chapters 1 and 2 and the demo for 3 and explore what we know so far, what we can theorise about at this time, and what we might expect when the full game is out. This video will discuss chapter 1 specifically and explain just what happened on that fateful night. Firstly, for those of you that haven't watched Faith or played Faith, I would really encourage you to go and play it. You can download it on Steam or get the first 2 chapters on itch.io, or watch my playthrough of the first 3 here. But what is this indie retro horror series even about? Well, it all started on
September 21st, 1987.
when 2 priests, Father Allred and our protagonist, John Ward in blue, travelled to rural Connecticut to investigate a case of demonic possession. Amy Martin, a 17-year-old girl who lived with her parents and twin brothers, Nate and Jason, was the one who they came to perform the exorcism on. Unfortunately, after trying and failing, Father Allred died after being strangled by Amy in the basement, and John, who was seeing to her parents upstairs, had fled after learning what had happened. This is all prior to the actual gameplay of Faith Chapter 1, but sets up John's return to that house exactly 1 year later after what had happened. The player arrives in the woods near the house and, armed with only his cross, begins to make his journey through the woods, picking up various notes with clues about various bits of lore that help piece together just exactly what is going on in this game. There's a public lecture that highlights the state's historical connections to witchcraft, Satanism and the beast system. One showing a birthday party for Nate and Jason, amongst others which I will come on to. On his way to the house, John is attacked by a strange white spider-looking demon. This creature, seemingly just an enemy, actually has a lot more significance to the game and its lore than I originally thought, as he appears in multiple endings of Chapter 1. The creature is actually a demon who possessed a child named Michael Davies and was in the care of another priest, Father Garcia, who we play as in the prologue of Chapter 2. This prologue shows Father Garcia with Michael tied up in his home after months of trying to exorcise the demon inside him, to no avail. With the player trying one final time, unfortunately Michael escapes and flees into the woods surrounding the Martin house and proceeds to attack John, as we see in Chapter 1. Father Garcia is also seen numerous times in Faith Chapter 1 as a grey figure who, if you kill at the end of the game, you see Michael in the back seat of John's car as he kills him, and you receive the father and son ending.
I shall not be afraid.
Though this is not the canonical ending, which I will go on to later, this is proven by seeing Father Garcia later in Chapter 2. Upon reaching the house after picking up the key in the shed, John makes his way to the basement, reading more notes found in various items, some from Mrs. Martin and some from John that he wrote when the original exorcism took place. Upon returning to the basement where Father Allred was murdered, Amy, possessed by the demon, emerges, and only after defeating her does the attic door unlock and we do battle on a satanic pentagram, after which the demon jumps out of the attic window back into the woods. This is when a gun appears, and with writing in blood on the foyer floor telling us to kill her. Before we run through the multiple endings, let's just explore a secret boss battle that I managed to do, because that also highlights something else that we did not know about John after what happened in September 21st, 1986. So if you take the gun and shoot the mirror where there was seemingly a ghost behind John on the other side, if you shoot that mirror 3 times, you can then walk in and you have a secret boss battle with some sort of demon in some weird reality. Not sure what it means, but when you beat the demon, you get this note. December 30th, 1986. Dear Dr. McGlasson, it has been 30 days since the beginning of my treatment here at Yale Psychiatric Institute. Dr. Spinal, who has been so patient with me, has helped me understand my afflictions and has helped me find a way to move forward and accept the truth. With Dr. Spinal's help, I have come to accept what really happened in September at the Martin family residence. I accept that what happened was not the result of any supernatural phenomenon, but rather the desperate actions of a young girl driven to violence by her dogmatic parents and old church rituals that are thought to drive out evil. I am happy to report, since accepting the truth, my nightmares have ceased, and I now enjoy peace of mind that I have not felt since the incident. Given my progress since first coming here, I respectfully request my release from Yale Psychiatric Institute, contingent upon follow-up appointments with Dr. Spinal in the future. Sincerely, John Ward. So this note tells us that John was admitted, he either admitted himself or the police or whoever admitted John after what had happened that night when Father Allred died. And what's seemingly happening there is I get the impression that John is trying to make sure that he gets out, because naturally if he believed everything he just said and that it wasn't all real, there was no supernatural activity, we wouldn't be playing Faith Chapter 1, he wouldn't have gone back to finish what he started. Interestingly, in Chapter 2 there is a note that relates to John being in the psychiatric ward in Yale that just states that the new patient initial consultation, John Thomas Ward. So yeah, after the initial exorcism, the failed exorcism of Amy Martin, Father Allred died. John was put into a psychiatric ward for like 3 months, I think. Dr. James Spinal, non-responsive for first half hour, followed by fragmented exorcism narrative. Subject unable to maintain consistency in story. For example, stating that Amy was in the basement and then saying she was in the attic. The subject insists the incident was the result of demonic possession. Cannot declare subject of sound mind. Will require several more sessions to fully understand the subject's mental state. Will advise Martin family attorneys. So this just tells us that John was in a very bad way naturally after what had happened to Father Allred, and it took John only a couple of months to get his head together and decide, I need to get out of here because I need to go back. Or at least maybe he just went back because it was a full year before he returned, right? So he went back, it was December when he seemingly said he was okay and ready to leave. So there was a time between sort of January and September of 1987 where John was doing something, whether he was still investigating what happened or maybe he was trying to get his life back to normal, but one way or another he felt like he had to return to help Amy. I think it was a case of helping her. But now let's run through the multiple endings and their meaning within the game. Even though there is only one true ending, you can still gain information from the other endings. Now the ending mentioned previously, in which you take the cigarette looking gun out into the woods and shoot that grey figure who would run off if you let him, is the father and son ending, in which after shooting the grey figure, which we know from chapter 2's prologue is actually Father Garcia, and we return to our car, we find that Michael attacks and kills us. Ending 1, which is the murderer ending, in which we go out and do what the ketchup on the floor in the house tells us to do, is to go find Amy, who is possessed by the demon and currently wounded. We then shoot her. John returns to his car before being stopped by the police, who arrest him for the murder of Amy. And a note in the arrest report states that John was actually not an ordained minister after all, despite what you initially would think based on his appearance. Now this is actually a very unclear aspect of our protagonist, and it's not exactly specified if John ever was a minister or not. Was he pretending? Was he originally an ordained priest and was removed, and the powers that be didn't want anyone to know that he was a part of, you know, their faith? Because there are some notes that contradict each other in terms of throughout the chapters about John and the fact that he is an ordained minister, or he was and then he wasn't, or he was pretending to be one. Suffice to say that there is something not quite right about what John's role is in the church. This ending, however, is also not the canonical ending. This is proven when Amy makes a brief appearance in chapter 2's demo, highlighting that the demon possessing her is very much alive. But how exactly did Amy become possessed in the first place? There are a few notes in particular that give us an idea about potentially how Amy ended up in the position she did. Her reply from a missionary who talks of the religion of Kimbamba and how they worship San La Muerte, or Saint Death, provides one theory, as they briefly talk about how things move around in the house and some supernatural stuff starts happening. So that seemingly could be like a red herring, because I don't see how that necessarily relates to what I'm going to come on to now, which is ending 3, which is the offering ending of the game, which provides the reality of how Amy ended up in this situation. So in the offering ending, the player discovers what appears to be some kind of corpse in the woods. It just looked like blood on the floor to me, but it's apparently a corpse surrounded by rocks. So if you shoot that and then return to the car, John will drive away, and soon, however, you notice figures cloaked in red appearing in the background, and John is stopped by the red figures. This confirms for me that there is a cult who is involved in all this. Again, whilst not canon, provides a very interesting note from a man named Gary. It reads as follows. Hello, Amy. I'm sorry to hear about your parents' decision. It is hard for people to trust what they do not understand. I know you are only 17, but you are clearly an adult and you are able to handle your own life. Do not let your mum and dad stop you from following your dreams. If there is anything I can do to help you, just let me know. Be a having a get-together at the clinic Saturday night, and I would love for you to stop by. We still consider you a part of the team, even if your mum and dad do not. We hope to see you there. Gary. Gary is a name that pops up a lot in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3's demo, and he is seemingly the cult leader who is trying to bring these demons to life through the various rituals of his cult. From the letter, he may have also worked in some form at the abortion clinic with Amy. There is also a note that only appears in the Game Jolt edition of Faith, or so the wiki says. That is from Mrs. Martin, who was informed that a man was talking to one of her twins, so Nate or Jason, away from the others at the party. Now, this is just speculation at this time, but this could well have been Gary, as a note in the canonical ending of Chapter 2 mentioned the twins were to be used to summon a demon. It was from Father Garcia at the end, and it read, "John, we don't have much time. The profane Sabbath is almost upon us. If they find Nate and Jason, they will perform a ritual on them to call forth a demon of unspeakable power. The name of the demon is Malthus. I am in the process of discovering their whereabouts, and I will contact you again soon. We must not let them do to the boys what they did to Amy. Father Garcia." That confirms to us that they are going to use the two twins wherever they are now, because remember, the parents both died. Amy is possessed and still part of the cult, it seems. So where are the boys now? I don't know who's in their care. There's also the hunter ending, where if you shoot a deer, his friends return the favour in style. They're not really relevant to the plot, but just adds to the whole setting of the beasts in nature and just weird stuffs in general. I just think it's quite cool. It's a nifty little extra ending. The true canonical ending of Faith Chapter 1, however, is ending 5, when Faith endures. And I was actually a little surprised when I learned this, given the intrigue and how much the other ones I thought were really quite cool, like shooting Amy and the cult, the offering ending as well. I thought those were really cool endings. But in any case, to get this ending, you have to keep the gun and return to the car before seeing Michael leap out at you. Shooting him will see him stagger onto the road before being hit by a truck and die. Cool little Easter egg on the truck is Airdorf, which is the indie developer for this game, so that's quite cool. And by process of elimination, we can work out that this is the true canonical ending. So if ending 1 took place, we wouldn't see Amy in Chapter 2. Although I will caveat this by saying that there is an argument that Chapter 2 is all a nightmare, and potentially it didn't all happen, but we'll get onto that in its own video. So, if ending 2 took place, we wouldn't see Father Garcia again, as he would die, and we also may have seen Michael still running around the place in Chapter 2. If ending 3 took place, then it's fair to assume John would either have been inducted into the cult, which would not play into the events of Chapter 2 and particularly Chapter 3's demo, or they would have killed him so we wouldn't have seen him anyway. If ending 4 was canon, that's just kinda lame, I think. Which leaves ending 5, when Faith endures. I think also there's sort of an audio cue almost, with the music from ending 5 is slightly sort of higher and slightly more upbeat, which gives me the impression that that is the true ending. I don't know if that's just me, I might need to listen out for it.
I can't explain what happened at that house. I can only have faith that I did the right deed. Don't be afraid, John. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, don't then there will he be also. We can banish this demon together.
In the last Faith video, we explored all things Chapter 1, all of its endings, all of its characters, and what they all mean. Today, however, we're going to take a look at the first half of Chapter 2 and discuss the mysteries of Gallup Cemetery and the Snake Meadow Hill Church. But first, let's get into the prologue. As mentioned in the previous video regarding Michael and Father Garcia of Chapter 1, the prologue of Chapter 2 sees us control Father Garcia as he tries to exorcise the demon within Michael. However, as we know, it fails and he escapes into the woods of Chapter 1, where we see him trying to attack John multiple times, until his demise in the true ending of Chapter 1. After that sequence, we get a screen that appears with "It's 2 AM, which may hold some real significance to understanding Chapter 2 as a whole. The reason for this is that unlike in Chapter 1, where we saw John travel in a car to his destination, which is the Martin family residence, this time the screen just appears and we see John surrounded by a circle of rocks as we make our way to Gallup Cemetery. We then enter the save room and are greeted by 3 people, all who have seemingly been used by the cult to conjure more demons. As more notes tell us, there are promises the cult made to help one of them bring their grandfather back from the dead, which was never their original intention. Another, a promise of power after dealing with an abusive father, and a woman who lost her baby due to the cult and was led into the woods to meet Gary. As John approaches the mirror to the far end, we see a cutscene of John holding a key with an extremely pleasing smile on his face. This, I believe, is the start of what appears to be John's battle with himself, and a reflection of the state of his mind in this chapter. Now, after purifying those 3 souls with our trusty cross, we see a gate without a fence. So naturally, that key we saw John have in his hand would surely fit that lock, right? Well, yes, as we know, but you have to do something first. And John going back to the mirror, in our reflection, we see John stab himself in the eye with that key, symbolising that making the relevant sacrifice, in this case his eye, can help him see the truth, which in this instance is through the locked gate and a new area of the cemetery. A little further up, and 1 tree demon later, we reach a church that looks a little worse for wear. Now, the notes for both the Faith Chapter 2 demo and the full chapter help us explore just exactly what happened here, and honestly it's quite fascinating. This church, or sanctuary as the notes seem to call it, seemed to be housing for many children who are part of the church and the attached orphanage, at least in the beginning anyway. Most of the notes in the demo are written from an unnamed man or woman who worked at the church. Judging by the notes, I would guess they were like another nun or a volunteer, but again it's not specified. But this person had 6 children in their care, all of which strayed off into the corn maze and died, seemingly ripped apart by something. She also mentioned that a girl stayed in the house last night. Now, we don't know when last night is, however my initial thoughts were that it was Amy Martin, because as we know she seemingly survived the events of Chapter 1 as we see her again in Chapter 2. But now thinking more carefully, the dates just don't add up. Amy Martin was 17 during the events of Chapter 1, yet one of the notes found in the full Chapter 2 game state the following. On our way in, we asked some of the locals about the church. It was mostly the stories we had heard before, evil spirits dragging children into the cornfield and secret tunnels under the chapel, but there was this spindly lady game that we hadn't heard yet. Apparently it has something to do with summoning the spirit of a woman who used to take care of orphans back in the 50s. There was even an old rhyme they told us. Walk the church from room to room and maybe you will see her. She will move when you do, but never try to trick her. Now you might just think that it's referring to the specific spindly lady demon that you see in the church. Well, maybe it could, however that would mean that we would have to accept that whoever this demon was, or spirit of a woman, had their own backstory that related to this church that we aren't told about, or that we aren't privy to. If it had something to do with a woman who took care of orphans back in the 50s, then surely this quote relates to Sister Bell, even though the rhyme itself does not, as we don't see Sister Bell until the end of the game. Also, according to the Faith Wiki, the design of the Spindly Lady Demon was selected as the winner of a character design contest announced before the full version of Faith Chapter 2. So what that's trying to tell us is that the rhyme itself was added in later into the game, but the original quote about a spirit of a woman who used to take care of orphans back in the 50s likely related to Sister Bell. Now, not too long after those 6 children died in the corn maze in the note writer's stead, the church then sent a new volunteer to help look after 6 new children in the sanctuary, Sister Bell. Seemingly normal in the beginning and spending all her time with the new children, dancing with them, talking to them as they surround her, but she is noted as being a little off, staring into the sky as if talking with someone. Cut to note 5, that is seemingly written by a detective who is sent to investigate Snake Meadow Hill Church, along with Father Clark, who apparently runs the place. After 4 of those 6 new children have gone missing. There is one missing woman. I can only presume that that is the one who wrote those notes. And of course one deceased nun, who we can only guess is Miriam Bell. It's not explained what happened during that time between Sister Bell arriving and the kids going missing, but you could hazard a guess or two. However, 2 kids are left in the sanctuary. Twins. Now, if you've been following Faith, this is key, as those twins must be Amy Martin's 2 twin brothers, Nate and Jason. Note 6 talks of the twins seeing Miriam Bell, though no one else can seem to see her, almost like an apparition. Whilst Note 7 tells us how Miriam was seen dragging the twins down into the basement, despite she apparently being dead. Presumably she took them down there to perform a ritual on them, if the last note in the demo is anything to go by. Written by Sister Bell herself, it reads,
"Here is the ritual of the door to hell. Let no brother or sister utter it. He that is master of spirits, let 3 spirits that follow the dragon be put into the effigy of the accursed. Only then can it be purified. You will know it is time when its eyes glow red. To enter the unseen world, destroy the purified effigy with fire. Then shall the door to hell be opened."
In the full game, once you enter the basement, there is a final memoir from Father Clark, who clearly went down into the basement to try and save the twins from Sister Bell. And you can guess how that ended, as the note is called Final Memoirs. There's one thing in this note that I can't get out of my head though. "I now descend the staircase, knowing full well that she awaits for me ahead. Checking my old watch has revealed something quite astonishing. Time doesn't change down here as we know it on the surface. Even now, the hands don't move past 2 o'clock. God's work be done. I have been to where only the faintest lights shine and protect from things unspeakable." Unspeakable referring to the unspeakable demon that the cult are trying to summon, but it's the reference about time that most fascinates me. Time doesn't change down here like it does on the surface. Even now the hands don't move past 2 o'clock. And what's the first thing that we saw after the prologue with Father Garcia? It's 2 AM. This might be trying to tell us that perhaps the cult, using the satanic rituals and demons with unspeakable powers, can maybe manipulate reality, maybe even time, in regards to what John actually thinks is real and not real. So perhaps what John is seeing in this chapter is only what the cult wants him to see. However, we will go into further detail about that in the next video. These demo notes give us so much information and background on the connections of chapter 1 and 2, and most notably with what happened to the Martin kids after Amy's failed exorcism on September 21st, 1986. Or at least, that's what it seems like, because as previously mentioned, the dates don't add up. So what this game tends to do quite well what the Faith series, it says, does quite well, is that it gives you information about different characters and events, but in the context of something that may or may not be happening, that may not be real, if that makes any sense. There is also a note in the graveyard that confirms the Martins' parents' death on that fateful night too. The cult took the twins, perhaps even before that night, and kept them at this sanctuary under the careful eye of a demon posing as a nun from the church, Miriam Bell. At least that's what it seems like on the surface. As we go further into this, I'm of the opinion that that is not necessarily how it is. For now, let's get back to John and notes from the full chapters game, and the first slot we find when we explore the sanctuary, which are from a group of ghost hunters who are trying to get a scoop after hearing about what happened, presumably back in the 1950s, which is when we think that Miriam Bell was originally there. As expected though, it doesn't end well for these guys either, with one of them getting stuck in the basement and another one going missing. The most interesting part of this exploration of the sanctuary is that if you go into the confessional booth, John then starts discussing his sins and discussing them with someone, knowing full well that whatever is on the other side is not someone that's going to help him. I hazard a guess that this is maybe Gary or another demon entirely based on the alternate ending. Now, John bearing his soul and repenting for his sins for failing to help Amy, as well as the various notes we have about John and his mental well-being, give us a clear indication that he is not someone who is in the best frame of mind when all of this is happening. And keep that in mind as we move on to what happens next. After a cute puzzle to avoid which very well may be the unspeakable demon, it's the next note we find that really shows that the cult is messing with John. Initially, the note comes across as another newspaper article where it discusses the 3 murder victims, presumably the 3 that we found in Gallup cemetery earlier in the game. But as you go on, the note turns into something about John, where it states that John was the one that killed Amy, and to not mourn the loss of those people. And then the note starts to talk to John directly. It begins to attack him by stating that he is the one that killed those people by cutting off their heads. So again, it's changing the narrative of what may have happened to try and feed off of the guilt that John has for failing to help Amy in the first place. And speaking of Amy, with the newspaper article in quotation marks ending with "I'm here, John," in that familiar purple writing of Amy Martin's. Then it cuts to this, John in the middle of a cult ritual surrounded by cultists, as well as Amy Martin, still possessed as she was in the last chapter, at the head of it all. Then we see this, and I honestly don't quite know what to make of it, at least when I first played the game. But after reading and rereading and thinking some more, and at least as it stands, focusing on the first half of this chapter at least, there are too many contradictory bits of information to try and create some kind of cohesive timeline of events for this chapter, because at present it feels very much like the cult are either manipulating John's already damaged mind, as that newspaper writing showed. They were clearly telling John stuff that he didn't want to hear, that he was the one that killed Amy and that he killed those 3 people as we were making our way through the cemetery. So again, it goes back to how it feels very much like the cult are either manipulating John's already damaged mind, because as we know, John was in the psychiatric ward, and apparently at the same time as Amy Martin, according to one of the notes. So the cult are taking advantage of John's unstable mind and showing him things that they want him to see to mess with him. And they clearly want something from John, or they just enjoy watching him suffer, which may be another thing. It's either that, or this is a large sort of outcome based on the second part of this chapter, which we will go through thoroughly in the next video, which is that John himself is so wrapped with guilt over his failure to save Amy from the cult on that fateful night in September, is having nightmares about being initiated into the cult and becoming one of the things that he has sworn to stop.
Come on, kill him. Oh, Elden Ring. Oh, wait, I didn't see you there. I was just, playing video games. And if you guys, you like video games, right? Of course you do. If you like video games, then you must love two good friends sitting talking for video games for an hour or so. And if you do, go and check out the Video Game Vibes podcast hosted by yours truly, PatriotJax, and my good friend Grog Games. If you like hearing my throaty British accent and Grog Games' lovely American voice. Every fortnight we upload an episode talking about a particular game. Could be an indie game, could be the latest news and what's going on in the video game industry, or we end up just talking about random stuff like mowing the lawn and Love Island. These are just random things that have come up at the start of our podcast. But yes, we we talk about video games, and if that interests you in any way, hit the link below. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube. Go and check us out wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate us 5 stars. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
I survived the nightmare, but did I really do the right thing? I don't know what is real anymore. My faith is weak, and I feel a dark shadow over me. This will be my greatest test of faith yet. God have mercy on my soul.
So in the last video we talked about the first half of chapter 2 and all things Snake Meadow Hill Church and Sister Bell. But now I want to go through and discuss the rest of chapter 2, and more importantly, John's mental state, the alternate ending that we can get, how to get it, and then the big question of this chapter: did any of it actually happen? Now why do I ask this? Well, because no matter what ending you get after the final boss battle with Miriam Bell, it cuts to John waking up in his bed, with multiple endings using the word nightmare specifically, thus implying that none of what we saw actually happened. This would make a lot of sense given what we saw happen to John, for starters turning into a demon, stabbing himself in the eye and luring children to their doom, just to name a few. Before we get into that, let's just pick up where we left off before, as John read a very interesting news article and became part of a cult ritual that turned him into a demon, of which he then ran around passing some people on the bridge before turning back into a human on the other side and entering the creepy candy tunnels, which, as we learned from the notes, were used by the cult to move around the area more easily without being seen. Initially we are led to believe this was the home of the candy store killer who lured victims to these tunnels to kill them. As we progress through, however, one of the last notes tells us that there was no candy store killer at all, and that what they, the policeman in this note in particular, were dealing with was not human. It was likely a lie fabricated by the cult to hide their demon activities. It also made for an easy way to find people to use in ritualistic activities, as there would often be people living in the tunnels. A few more great sequences with the torch later, I love this part of the game by the way, I thought it was really clever, have led us to what appears to be the lair of the unspeakable demon. The reason why I say this is that once you get there and fight Sister Bell in the final battle with the help of Father Garcia, the last shot you see is of the demon showing its true self to John, and this is really important, and let me break down why. Let's go with the premise that this is a nightmare that John's having, and John's mental state has not been the same since that fateful night on September 21st, 1986, when he failed to save Amy, Father Allred, and Amy's parents. The notes help us piece together a timeline of what happened after that day, starting with John's note to his wife Karen back in chapter 1. Karen, the church might contact you in a few days to tell you their version of what happened to me. I want you to hear it from me first. A year ago, I was involved in the exorcism of Amy Martin. What they said in the papers about what happened isn't true. She killed my superior, Father Allred, with her bare hands. When I confronted her, she escaped, managed to cut the power to the house, and strangled her own parents with their own intestines. I have to go back to that house. The nightmares I'm having are real. She's still there, waiting for me. I can still help her. If I don't come back, know that I love you and I'm sorry. John. The focus of this note is the quote, "The nightmares I'm having are real." This may tell us that chapter 2 is one of many vivid and lucid dreams that John is having about the cult, but perhaps what he is seeing may well be real in some form or another. As a dream showed him that Amy was waiting for him back at the house, maybe chapter 2 is the cult showing John just how powerful they truly are. Also a little tidbit, the note from Karen at the end of the game is clearly in response to this note from a year ago. Anyways, back to the timeline. After John escaped the house in 1986, the police either caught up to him, or the Catholic Church or the cult opted to inform the relevant authorities about John and the Martin family deaths, and John was then admitted to Yale Psychiatric Institute, where he was under the watch and care of Dr. James Spinal. I'm going with Spinal. The first half an hour of John being there was him discussing what happened, which led them to declare John was not sound of mind. A note from the confession booth goes on to state that John is suffering from delusion, playing the part of a hero, and that the cult and demons are the result of his mind inventing them to hide the guilt he has for his actions. But the next part of the note really caught my eye. "And for the love of God, please have Miss Martin transferred to another facility. Somehow, John knows that she is in here with him." I think this is huge, and I think it will be huge for chapter 3 too. John and Amy were both admitted to Yale Psychiatric Institute, and they were both there at the same time. I think we will see more flashbacks of that if the trailer for chapter 3 is anything to go by. The next 2 notes of John in the Institute are dated strangely though. By that I mean that in one for October the 31st, Dr. Spinal releases John from his care, and seemingly from the Institute as well, but then the note that you get for beating the secret boss in chapter 1 is dated the 30th of December 1986, which is John requesting to be released. So I'm not sure about that exactly, but anyway, I think if they were dated the other way around it would make more sense, but that's just me. In any case, it seems that around sort of January 1987 is when John is definitely out of the Institute, but from then on it's not known what he does from January to September. In one of the chapter 1 ending notes, it stated that Amy had been missing after escaping from whatever mental institution she had been moved from only 9 days prior to the events of chapter 1. So September 12th, 1987. Chapter 1 only happened, and John only returned to that house after he was having these nightmares. So, by having the nightmare of chapter 2 as a whole, John was perhaps able to get that same feeling that something bad was going to happen, and thus chapter 3 will take place in more concrete reality like chapter 1. So whilst I understand some people's maybe annoyance at the fact that chapter 2 was seen as like an entire waste almost because it didn't happen, but I think that because we know that John was having nightmares prior to chapter 1, John had to have these nightmares again, potentially for chapter 3 to take place. I know he got the notes from Father Garcia about the profane Sabbath and stuff like that, but I still think these nightmares help John realise what he needs to do. But also I do think there are a number of themes that we can take from chapter 2, and that perhaps they tell us how John is feeling and how his mental and emotional state is at that time. And I'd like to start with Sister Bell and Snake Meadow Hill Church. Now I don't think it's a coincidence that the nightmare chapter that we have had John go up against a demon that is posing as a nun in a church. I think that was a clever way on the developer's part to tell us how John feels about the church that he believes in so strongly. I think it's fair to assume that the cult, at least in John's mind, have so much power that they have infiltrated the church and his superiors to the point where he can't even trust them. Thus the whole name of the game being Faith, John's faith, and how it is being tested by the cult. I've just realised I do a lot of theory videos on cults. Anyway, the unspeakable demon showing himself to John and that waking him up from his nightmare is a reflection of John's faith and how the cult is trying to show him that his faith in God and the church is misguided. John is battling reality. As stated in one of the ending quotes, he doesn't know what is real anymore, and saving the twins is John's way of redemption for failing to save Amy and his soul at the same time. But speaking of Amy, remember in the other video where I said that Amy is alive because we saw her in chapter 2? Well, I'm pretty sure that I was certainly wrong on that one, and it's relatively easy to deduce. Not least with John stating, "I've finished my work with Amy," but also because that was the nightmare and she wasn't really there. The only time we see her, funny enough, in chapter 2 was when there is a ritual taking place. It's John losing faith, if you like, and becoming a part of the cult. This does lead me to think that she definitely died after escaping the house in chapter 1, which then calls into question the true ending of chapter 1 a little, but maybe not, because it kind of makes more sense that John actually then shoots her. He then gets caught by the police, but rather than going to prison, they deem him sort of mentally unwell, and he goes to Yale Psychiatric Institute. But then what happens to Michael if he doesn't die and get run over in chapter 1? Too many questions. Too many questions. It is likely that she just escaped the house and died of her wounds from the battle that John had with her. I think that's what we can safely theorise at this stage. But moving on, I want to explore the initiation ending of chapter 2 because it's really cool. It requires multiple tasks and says a lot about John's fears. To achieve this ending, you are directed to it by the note found on the Save family tomb. Dearest disciple, verily not everyone who says Lucifer shall inherit his kingdom. You must first conjure his demon. You must then serve his demon. You must then walk among the children of men as his demon. Thus shall you receive the blessing of the unspeakable. Return to the Save family tomb whenever you are in need of rest. Carry. So to conjure his demon, you have to, once stabbing yourself in the eye with the key in the save room, walk back to the start of the game where you just appeared and create a pentagram using the blood from your eye and defeat the demon that comes out. Then later on at the church, you have to take one of the children that never escaped or died in the cornfield and take them with you into the church and offer it to the demon. Then after that, once you are turned into a demon, you then have the opportunity to kill the 2 people on the road, after which you are then able to access the secret note found in the inner sanctum, which is the name of the sort of ending area where you have the final battle. I'm just calling it sort of the unspeakable's lair, but it's the inner sanctum, which is beyond the candy tunnels, and that note, secret note, states from the cult, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. We shall visit thee soon." Which confirms that you've got the initiation ending. But also the battle with Sister Belle at the end is also slightly different, with her looking more sort of ragged and slightly bigger. I think it's showing the unspeakable is breaking out of her, I guess. But after the fight, and once you get back to John's house and you go outside, the back doors open so you can go out to the back, you see all the cult members standing there, and John gets a visit from the unspeakable, and then it shows John's bleeding eyes because he is receiving the blessing of the unspeakable, which again is to do with his eyes and his mind and his soul having been opened to the wonders of the unspeakable and the cult, and he can now see the world and reality for what they believe it to be. I'm also dying to know what are in those rooms that John will not go into. I'm really curious. I have absolutely no idea. what are in those rooms, but I just want to know. I just want to know. Maybe he took Amy there, I don't know. This chapter was all about John's faith, and despite it all seemingly being a nightmare, you can take so much from this chapter, which also sets up chapter 3, as I stated before. John has these nightmares, but they help him understand what he needs to do if he chooses the right path within the dream. The true ending shows us this, that by saving Father Garcia and stopping the unspeakable in the final battle, whilst being a dream, it's telling us that John is choosing the path of faith. He is, as you say, going forth with faith.
Welcome.
Welcome everyone to the beginning of what is hopefully a long series on the channel titled The Story Of, where we shine a spotlight on a character from games we've played and enjoyed and want to go into a bit more depth about certain characters from those games. The game we'll be discussing today is the Faith series by indie developer Airdorf, a hugely underrated pixel horror game about demonism and the church, largely inspired by the satanic scare of the 1980s, with widespread paranoia about devil worshipping and other occult activities rife throughout the US. I've already discussed the first 2 chapters in great length in other videos, so if you like this video, definitely go and check them out. Today's character spotlight is on Michael Davies from Faith. We'll go through what information we have from the games and explore what is, in truth, a quite tragic tale of a boy whose potential for a full life was cruelly taken away from him. This is the tragic story of Michael Davies. The Faith series to date doesn't have a large number of characters, and its focus is of course on the main protagonist John Ward. And whilst there are certainly a number of enemies John has to deal with throughout the first 2 chapters and the chapter 3 demo, some with backstories you can learn about through notes left after exercising them with John's faithful crucifix, Michael Davies' story is particularly fascinating for me. Not least due to the prologue of chapter 2 that saw us learn a bit more about Michael prior to him attacking John in Faith chapter 1, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We first see Michael Davies as a white, demon, spider-looking thing in Faith chapter 1 as he is constantly attacking John while stating a variety of interesting phrases in his distorted, demonic voice. I'll list them all here. They essentially range from to some explicit Spanish translations that I won't say out loud. These don't give us much insight into Michael himself, other than the fact that he may very well be Spanish or Mexican based on him using that language. But what did happen to Michael? Well, looking chronologically at the 2 full Faith chapters, we begin with Father Garcia, a man of the cloth who had Michael in his care for one reason or another. My guess is that his parents went to the church for help after changes they'd noticed in their son. Father Garcia was assigned to take care and investigate Michael's condition that was inherently not something normal science could deal with. We never know what happened to Michael prior to his transformation into what one of the notes labels him as the Chupacabra. However, based on what happens with the rest of the game in relation to the cult, it is fair to assume at this point that Michael was abducted by the cult and a ritual was performed on him which led him to become the demon we meet in the first chapter. After the ritual, the cult perhaps released him and he found his way back home. Only he wasn't the same. We also receive information about Michael through a number of notes, 2 specific notes that relate to one another, one being a response from Father Garcia to his superior, Cardinal Gifford. Father Garcia, you are hereby instructed to release Michael Davies from your custody and return him to his home immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Davies have already been contacted by our office. A representative of the church is currently en route to their home. to discuss compensation in return for their discretion. You will meet with our representative there and accompany him back to Rome. Cardinal Gifford. To which Father Garcia replies, Esteemed Cardinal Gifford, with all due respect, you cannot grasp the importance of the work I am doing for young Michael without being present here. Michael needs my help now more than ever. In the past few weeks I have made great progress with Michael's affliction. Nevertheless, whatever darkness is inside of him fights back with increasing ferocity. We must not let up the fight against the enemy at such a critical time. There is another reason why I dare not return Michael to his family, nor let them see him. Darkness inside him afflicts his soul, but it also causes a terrible strain on his body. So that there may be no mistaking what I mean, I have enclosed a photograph of young Michael during one of our sessions. The photograph to which they are referring is the 3-month photograph. Now, once he was in Father Garcia's care, we can assume, based on the Faith Chapter 2 prologue, that his transformation all took place under Father Garcia's care. We know this as we see 3 Polaroid photos believed to be taken by Father Garcia in his home. However, we don't know that for sure, and perhaps those photos were provided to Father Garcia by his parents. However, I'm inclined to think that that's not the case. The first photo is him on day 1, presumably the first day under Father Garcia's care, where he looks like a happy, carefree child. Then we see the next photo, only 2 weeks on, and his eyes have turned red, his teeth and skin are looking more decrepit, and he's also losing his hair. And then we see a final photo of Michael after 3 months under the care of Father Garcia, which is much more reflective of the demon we have come to know from Faith Chapter 1. His eyes blood red, and blood pouring from his mouth. It also looks like he is low to the ground, as he now seems to have started walking on all fours. And also his body looks thin, has become almost purely white. And this is important because in one of the notes found after the true ending, it stated that the chupacabra suffered from rickets, a vitamin D deficiency that occurs from not receiving enough sunlight. This would indicate that Michael was kept captive for a long time by Father Garcia, likely 3 months, as he was trying to help Michael. However, perhaps in doing so he may have worsened his condition. As Father Garcia tries to exorcise a demon from Michael, he forced the demon's hand and Michael broke free from his bonds with sheer force, and knocked the lights out too. Interestingly enough, however, he did not attack Father Garcia, for one reason or another. Perhaps there is still some part of Michael in there, and maybe him and Father Garcia grew close under his brief care before his transformation. Or perhaps Michael saw him as a threat and needed to escape quickly. We then see Michael eating the body of someone, likely a resident in the apartments or hotel that Father Garcia was staying in whilst he was caring for Michael.
Dios mío, what have you done? I have somebody in the pit! Stand by, Trumbo, evil. You shall breathe the wrath of the Almighty.
These are the events that precede Faith Chapter 1, as Michael has now escaped and moves into the surrounding woods of the Martin family home, just beyond Snake Meadow Hill Road. This is when we see him attacking John. Fast forward to the end of Faith, and once you defeat Amy and choose your particular ending is when we meet with Michael again. He is in multiple endings, one in which he is hiding in John's car and kills him as he attacks from behind. Now this is interesting to think, as this ending occurs as a result of John shooting Father Garcia, with Michael speaking the word whilst killing John. Maybe he was referring to Father Garcia and took revenge on John for killing him, which is perhaps another indicator that some part of Michael is still in there. Then there is the other ending, the true ending, in which John uses his trusty gun
with one bullet
to shoot Michael. He then staggers onto the road and is subsequently run over by Airdorf in lorry form. Father Garcia can be seen in the forest running around searching for Michael, but unfortunately was not able to reach him in time to try and bring him back to his home alive for another exorcism. Michael had an unfortunate fate befall him, and though it may seem like his fate was sealed when the cult took him, perhaps there was hope for him. The reason I say this is that in the Faith series, to date, there is in fact one person who has seemingly been saved from the cult who appeared lost under the control of a demon. And that was in the Faith Chapter 3 demo ending, where in the final battle against Lisa, who has been possessed, Once John exorcises the demon within her, Lisa runs out of the room. And now we don't see her afterwards, but it does offer some hope that people can be saved after their dealings with the cult. Like Amy, Michael wasn't lucky enough to be saved. He escaped Father Garcia and was in the wrong place at the wrong time. If John hadn't had that gun, perhaps Father Garcia could have found Michael and brought him back from the brink. Michael Davies was just a boy, with his whole life ahead of him, that got cruelly taken away by this demonic cult who do not care for the lives they destroy. They care only for their own selfish desires and bringing about unspeakable demons to further their goals. Michael Davies was just another pawn to be used and experimented on, and we can only hope that in Faith Chapter 3, the full game, John and Father Garcia succeed with the Martin twins, where they failed with Amy and Michael. This is unfortunately his tragic story, the story of Michael Davies.
I am a horrible human being, just like you.
Now, it's been quite some time since I dropped a theory video on this channel, and during that time a lot of stuff has happened in my life. However, I cannot let the final instalment of Faith the Unholy Trinity go by without diving in and getting the answer to all the questions that we still have. But there is so much to unpack here with this third and final chapter, so we're going to be going a bit further in depth into certain characters and topics in subsequent theory videos, as well as some more bigger theories and timelines and stuff. Those will come later. Today's video we are going to break down this specific chapter as a whole and just gain some more context and explain the three main endings of Faith Chapter 3 and what they mean for those characters. And we will try and do it in the context of Chapter 3 itself, but obviously we're going to be referring back to the other chapters as and when. So to provide some quick context to the lore, let's briefly look at what actually happened in Faith Chapter 3. So it carries on from the events of Faith Chapter 1 / John waking up from his nightmare, which was Faith Chapter 2. And yes guys, I've seen some comments, Chapter 2 was a nightmare. It was confirmed by Airdorf in a comment he left on one of my videos. Go and check it out. John, under guidance from Father Garcia, goes to 3 separate locations in Faith Chapter 3 to locate the Martin twins, Nate and Jason, before they are used by the cult, led by Gary Miller, who loves you, in the profane Sabbath as a sacrifice to bring forth the unspeakable demon. The first location being the abortion clinic that Amy used to work at under Gary, and is likely how she was groomed to be a part of the cult. Aside from the fight with Jeffrey the Demon, we also get a secret boss fight with a woman who I believe is Rhonda, based on the notes, who also works at the abortion clinic and was used to farm off newborn babies to the cult for the ritual of the second death. And I'm not going to go into further details on that, as it is freaky AF, just ask Gary himself. The second location is what we played in the demo of Faith Chapter 3, which was the apartment buildings, in which we have to save Lisa from the demon Alu, which is another demon brought forth by the cult, as the apartments are, again, run by Gary, who loves you. Lisa also has greater importance than we first realised when we pieced together notes and clips which show John and Lisa as 2 of the 6 children who are a part of the Snake Meadow Hill Church fiasco under Miriam Bell, which means I have to completely rethink Chapter 2 and what that actually means for John and his relationship to Lisa and the cult itself, and Miriam Bell, and Miriam Bell is Gary's mum, and all that sort of stuff. We got a lot to talk about. From quickly looking back at Chapter 2, there were a pair of twins that survived Snake Meadow Hill Church, though those were seemingly two twin boys, which kind of inferred that those were the Martin twins, though perhaps still Lisa and John are siblings. At least that's what I'm gathering from having played Faith Chapter 3, as John had a wife, Molly, or in other notes she was named Karen. Again, that was also confused me, but certainly it wasn't Lisa, which very much leads me to believe that they are either really good friends, perhaps that they were both brought to Snake Meadow Hill Church Orphanage together, or they're siblings. And being that they were already connected to the cult from their childhood, it poses further questions about their lives and how the cult view them. As well as Lisa, we also find details of a child named Tommy who lived with his mother at the apartments, before running into Tiffany, who, as we know, tried and failed to perform the ritual of the second death upon herself, but was unfortunately for her a rejected vessel. Unlike Amy, she instead became this thing, the self-proclaimed daughter of the unspeakable, which, by the way, that easily was the best build-up scene to a boss battle in the entire game. That was fantastic. Well done, Edorf. Moving on. And the third location is the cult's lair underneath a daycare centre where many cult activities take place, and where they can again take children for a required number of abhorrent cult rituals. It is also here where we play Squid Game. Boy! We get injected with something from Gary which further blurs the lines between what is reality and what is a nightmare for John. It is also here where we confront and fight Gary in his human form, where he enlightens us on a number of questions that we're allowed to ask him because that's a thing. I'm not mad about it, I just found it odd. The most unexpected answer to come from Gary, I think, was the truth that the twin boys, Nate and Jason, of the Martin family, do not actually exist. And more specifically, Cindy, the mum, had a miscarriage, which we see in a later note in one of the endings to cross-reference and prove what Gary was saying was correct. I thought we were making progress when I got her to accept that she had miscarried and that the twins are gone. But she now seems convinced that they are trying to make contact with them and that she can find replacements for their spirits to inhabit. But their existence after the miscarriage were fabrications that the cult fed to both John and to Cindy, who would not stop believing that they were real. Cindy Martin got to the point where she was creating birthday parties for them in her letters to Bob, her husband, and she would bring up the twins constantly in numerous letters in Faith Chapter 1, from starting their next school year to having blood on their hands from a deer outside. Gary and the cult perpetuated this false reality for her, as it kept her distracted from Amy, who was spending all of her time volunteering at the clinic that Gary and the cult occupied. In the same way, Gary wanted to mess with John, showing him false realities. There are legitimately so many things in the game I could just say, yeah, well that could all be in John's mind, and it likely wouldn't be too far from the truth, but I digress. Gary stated that he wanted John to come to the cult's lair, but I still don't quite understand why. Maybe John, like Amy, is a perfect vessel for the unspeakable, and this again plays into the notion that both John and Lisa may have either survived a ritual within Snake Meadow Hill Church when they were younger. In one note it stated, "She consumed 6 little twigs, only 2 were left to walk as husks." These 2 husks presumably being John and Lisa, but you may say that all happened like years ago, right? Years and years ago. So like the Snake Meadow Hill Church incident was around 1930 to 1950s, and neither John nor Lisa from where I'm standing, seem anywhere older than sort of their 30s, maybe close to 40s. But there's one thing that we have to remember about Chapter 2 and the notes from Father Clark, who was investigating Snake Meadow Hill Church with a detective. Time doesn't change down here as we know it on the surface. Even now, the hands don't move past 2 AM. This could potentially explain why John and Lisa, who, if they were at Snake Meadow Hill Church, were orphans and were picked up in the system by the cult during Miriam Bell's time. So this would be pre-Gary's arrival into the world. It explains how they were able to both be at the church at the same time and still be relatively young. Gary is also the son of Miriam Bell. By that I mean that the second death that was performed on Miriam Bell, a child was passed back through the hole in Miriam Bell's face that was created, and that child would be known as Gary Miller, a human being just like you and me.
Why you always lying?
As well as that, throughout this chapter, John is constantly having nightmares regarding that night on September 21st, 1986, where he, along with Father Allred, went to perform that famous exorcism on Amy Martin. And we get to learn a bit more about that night. Or, to be more specific, we get John's interpretation of events of that night, as that is the one big theme throughout not just this chapter, but the whole game, and it's truth or lies, reality or nightmare. John's mental state plays such a large part in what we see and play in the game, and very much how the cult and Amy have influenced John, and this is extremely apparent in the endings of Faith Chapter 3. The new vessel ending is very straightforward if you haven't done it. All you have to do is go to the locations and then get straight back in the car and leave. And doing this for all 3 locations, this thematically shows that John is just far too afraid to face Amy, or he'd prefer to just, stay at home rather than face the cult. But it is telling us and it's showing us that John has lost all faith in God and himself. This is really poignant, and whilst obviously not the true ending, is nonetheless important as we get to see John giving himself to the cult. Now, by the time that the cult arrived to John's house, I would be under the assumption that they would have already performed the ritual of the profane Sabbath on that specific day and brought forth the unspeakable, as John did not try and stop them. We do not hear of anything related to Father Garcia, at all, aside from the usual notes that we have. But that raises another theory for me, which I will discuss later. More importantly is the room that's seemingly being protected by John, which we saw in both the end of Faith Chapter 2 and Faith Chapter 3. In this ending, it looks like it was holding Amy Martin. But we get another note about John's admission to the Yale psychiatric ward, which is a big clue, which is obviously telling us that this is not, in fact, reality. And I think most people could kind of work that out. Unfortunately, I don't think we will ever actually see what is in this room, as this is the only time that we open this door, and all we see is just a reflection of John's unstable mind and the guilt that he has for not being able to save Amy. Look at the drawn-on window that mirrors the Martin house attic in Faith Chapter 1. Like, you can't be telling me that that's what that room actually looks like. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Or if it is, maybe that's just where John's hiding. Like, he's keeping his guilt locked away in that room, maybe, as a coping mechanism or something. But if Amy wasn't in there, why was it locked with crosses covering the door? Like, it doesn't add up, guys. It doesn't add up. Please let me know your theories on that room in the comments. We need to dive into it more. Cut to John in the Martin house, which is now completely run down, with John going from room to room, of course blaming himself for the death of the Martin family, and with John then kneeling on the Eye of the Unspeakable in front of 2 wooden mannequins that are obviously meant to represent the twins in their room, by the way. So what's interesting is all of the flashbacks John did not remember their room. It's very interesting that John's having flashbacks, but he's not got a memory of that room, even though he returned not that long ago where we saw the kid's room, which I guess is just another nod to the fact that the twins never existed. What's very interesting about this particular scene is obviously you've got Amy holding him in one arm, but we also see Michael Davies holding the other arm.
What?
Which at first I thought was just strange. I thought it was a bit out of place that Michael Davies was here holding John's arm. And then I just started to have a brainwave and I started to really think about it, and I was like, so if you think about John in chapter 1, and let's assume that he didn't fight the mirror demon, the secret mirror demon boss, he only fought Amy, and she got injured when she flew out of the window in the attic, right? So she was injured. The only other person that he attacked or fought, and we're not including the deer, guys, come on, was murdering Michael Davies, because that was the true ending. He shot Michael, and then Michael went onto the road and was run over by Airdorf. And now in chapter 2, we know for sure that chapter 2 was a nightmare. Whether it was showing John a reality, it was a nightmare. So we can rule out John actually having killed any of these demons that he might have killed in chapter 2. And then of course with chapter 3 in this route, we skip every location. So John doesn't even get a chance to kill or hurt any other demon or person. Which leads me to the conclusion that Michael is there also out of John's guilt. Perhaps in conversations with Father Garcia he learned about Michael like we did to further add to his guilt after shooting him. Which I think is just another layer to John's mental state and the guilt and everything that he's gone through. Like, we didn't really get any sort of hint that John had felt guilty for what he did to that white demon in chapter 1. But maybe this ending, despite not being a canon, like a true ending, is a nod to John's guilt as well. The house then gets swallowed up metaphorically by the unspeakable, and we're left with the Latin phrase of damnatio memoria. I'm probably saying that wrong. I only went to Latin club for like 2 weeks, guys, come on. Which loosely translates to the condemnation of memory, which according to Wikipedia is essentially a rewriting of history, which makes perfect sense for this ending, as the cult have gone so far into trying to destroy John's mental state. He does not know what is real anymore at this point in this route, in this ending. He believes he's failed the twins, who he couldn't possibly have helped, as they weren't around for him to help, unfortunately. He of course failed Amy, even when he went back to try and help her. And then of course he killed Michael. And so then he accepts the cult and the unspeakable, believing he could not fight back against them, and lets Gary and the cult and his guilt win. John, in this ending, has lost all faith. Hence why a lot of what we see in this ending does not make sense. Because if you try and understand it in the context of the whole game, like it literally gives me a headache thinking about it. The new purpose ending, which is ending 1, which is where you do not destroy the unholy trinity, and instead you have to drop what I'm guessing is the unspeakable's casket on top of the crucible, with the help of Father Garcia and of course his trusty shotgun. And after shooting Gary's head off, we then seal the giant floating casket on top of the unholy trinity, which would only temporarily stop Gary and the cult, as we learn from our conversation with Father Garcia. We did not destroy Gary or Malthus, but we just stopped the unspeakable for now.
John is still wrapped with guilt for failing Amy, and he does not really get any closure despite going to each of the locations and trying to help defeat the cult. But in the end, there remained things undone and too many questions for him, and despite agreeing to help Father Garcia take on the unspeakable, he has certainly not overcome what happened, and it will likely still haunt him forever. There's also a variant of this ending which you get a very different cutscene that tells us a bit more about the mental state of not just John, but Father Garcia.
I'm weak. I've done some more able things. I need time to figure this all out. That was story twist. Get easy, your evil.
And of course he is now being threatened by Father Garcia to help him destroy the unspeakable and take on the cult in other areas, I'm guessing other locations. But this raises a bigger question, and which I've also seen in the comments. Can Father Garcia actually be trusted? Maybe he was the inside that gave the cult influence on the church? Maybe I'm going too far with that. But maybe he hasn't forgiven John for murdering Michael Davies. You know, Michael just escaped Father Garcia's care. Father Garcia was doing everything he could to help him. Michael goes out into the woods, literally, like, it could have been not that long between the prologue of chapter 2 and chapter 1. It could have been like an hour, it could have been a day, it could have been less. And then John just happens to come along with a gun with one bullet and just shoots him dead. So it could be a lot more to do with Michael Davies than we think, but it's just a thought, and again, we will come back to it in another video. This is going on far too long. Now, the true ending of chapter 3 requires John to unseal the 3 parts of the Unholy Trinity, which will allow John to enter the Crucible. John must defeat 3 other demons in each location to do so, and we've spoken about the first 2, but the third boss, which is more of a mini-boss, does something rather odd when it actually gets John, and rather than being mortised, John will appear in what looks like the Psychiatric Institute, which unfortunately raises the question again, are we and John just being shown what the cult and this demon want us to see? Is that what John's room looked like when he was there? Was he even there in the first place? I mean, probably, but there's just too many questions right now. Anyways, the Crucible is open for John, and once jumping in, he is once again back in the Martin house. And in the Bible, the Crucible is used as a figure for the testing of people. And so what better place for John to be tested than the house where everything changed for him? Once he enters the attic, the place where he fought Amy and failed her, we shift to what is the real location, and very similar to the inner sanctum of the final boss in chapter 2. Now firstly, I'm not entirely sure I've got the correct names for the bosses of the final battle, but let's break it down because it can be a bit confusing. So we have Gary and his demonic form, which may or may not also be called Astaroth. So Gary could be the demon Astaroth, but they call him Gary, you get what I mean. As the song that's playing in the first phase is called Astaroth. In the second phase, when the additional demon joins the fight, was Malthus. Then when Gary / Astaroth and Malthus combine inside the body of Miriam Bell, they become, quote unquote, in the song title, Super Miriam. That's literally the name of the song in the final phase. So I'm going to say that Gary's demon name is Astaroth because he originally came from hell, so that demon is Astaroth, and combining with Malthus to make Super Miriam, which is hilarious by the way. After battling them and setting the body ablaze, Amy appears, which confirms that she was very much still alive after escaping the house in chapter 1. She was just injured from the battle with John in chapter 1. With Gary on his last legs, he tried to perform the profane Sabbath on Amy, as she is the perfect vessel to open the portal to hell and bring forth the unspeakable. However, the unspeakable, or at least the demon inhabiting Amy, instead calls Gary a failure for not bringing forth the Antichrist and failing in his mission, and he takes him back to where he originally came from. Because, spoilers guys, he is not a normal human being like us. John then finally gets to confront Amy one last time and gets to apologise for not being able to save her. Which, not just for John, but for me, felt so cathartic to see that. To really, to see John being able to just get the chance to just tell Amy that he's sorry. To at least alleviate some of the guilt, and for her to be able to tell him, you know, you did your best. And then also that line of hers that is such a killer, like it's very good. It's time to finish what you started, like.
Finish what I started.
That line just got me, man. It just got me so good. And with that, Father Garcia confirms to John that the unspeakable is actually still out there, and others could try to bring him into the world, and there might be some kind of sequel to Faith, maybe? Erdorf, can we get a confirmation if you see this video? John then has to decide whether to go with Lisa and settle down, or fight the demons. For the record, they both give us the same ending, name and title. What's different in this ending than the others though is that John and his outlook on things. Throughout the battle with Malthus and Gary, John had faith, and because of that he was able to withstand the attacks of the Super Miriam. He's fought his demons, you know, both in his mind and, you know, in his reality. He got to apologise to Amy, he was forgiven, and eventually was able to finish what he started on that fateful night in September, being able to free her from the demon that's plaguing her. She could finally be at peace, and now so could John. Faith the Unholy Trinity's entire theme has centred around guilt and seeing how it can destroy a person if they are unable to come to terms with what actually happened. People can end up believing so many things that aren't real, and for John, the cult did a good job of manipulating him and showing him many things that may or may not have actually happened. The only thing he could do to save himself was to fight those demons, the ones inside himself as well as the ones the cult threw at him. He has been through such an ordeal, I would still be surprised if he decided to take Lisa's hand and settle down, as he has surely seen too much and doesn't have all the answers he wants.
Lisa, can you see her?
Of course, John. She's been me for so long.
Yes. We must go with her.
I'm scared.
Leader the order of the second DOS.
So we have to talk about the revelation of John and Lisa in Faith chapter 3 being two of the 6 children during the second Snake Meadow Hill Church incident, and them definitely not being related or twins or siblings in any way. They are in fact friends. As was pointed out to me in one of the comments, obviously Lisa's surname is Pearson, and you see that name in the apartments, in the mailboxes. Anyway, so for context, the Snake Meadow Hill Church was used as an orphanage and a great way for the cult to acquire new children for rituals. But Before we get into John and Lisa in particular, we need to break down a timeline of events to give ourselves some perspective. And now for this timeline to make sense, as with everything to do with the Faith series, we have to make certain assumptions, so bear with me. We know for sure that there are 2 incidents at Snake Meadow Hill Church regarding children. The original one before Sister Bell's arrival, in which 6 children died, which was the prologue of Chapter 2. And don't get confused with the prologue section of the game regarding Father Garcia. It is the prologue of Faith Chapter 2, which related to the Scarecrow and the Corn Maze. Then there is the later Snake Meadow Hill Church incident where 4 children went missing, which Miriam Bell was a part of. Through the notes of Faith, we only get reference to 2 particular decades in which events of Snake Meadow Hill Church, and specifically Miriam Bell, in which they actually happened. The Chapter 3 note, which tells us Miriam Bell had the second death ritual performed on her, was in the 1930s. And note 12 of Chapter 2, which was the first day of the paranormal investigation, references the 1950s, in which they were told about the Spindly Lady game, which is to do with the spirit of a woman who used to take care of the orphans back in the 50s. Now we have note number 5, which tells us specifically about 1 missing woman, 4 missing kids, and 1 deceased old nun. Now why is this important? Well, having gone over these events so many times in my head, for it to make the most sense, despite all of this game's contradictions, Miriam Bell's second death ritual would have to have taken place at Snake Meadow Hill Church at least 20 years prior to her appointment as a volunteer to look after the second lot of 6 children. This is backed up by another note, the strange behaviour note number 4 from Faith Chapter 2, from a staff member that worked there that remarked that Sister Bell just instantly knew her way around Snake Meadow Hill Church, as though she had been there multiple times before and knows the site well. Now, whether Miriam Bell was a willing participant and member of the cult or not at the time of her second death ritual, I personally don't think she was, as I kind of like the idea that part of the cult's plan was to influence the church, and by finding suitable vessels for the second death ritual in people of the church such as Miriam Bell, and none. But again, this cannot be confirmed. Anyways, in 1934 Miriam was readied and the second death ritual was successfully completed, and trigger warning regarding the actual process of the second death, so you have been warned. After passing living newborns through the portal to hell, which was carved in her face, Gary, who is not a normal human being like the rest of us, came back through. This is where the Miriam Bell is Gary's mother thing comes from, because he came to this world from Miriam Bell. Now, I believe that either the original Snake Meadow Hill Church incident either happened alongside this in the 1930s, or perhaps slightly later in the 1940s. This coming from note number 3, in which Miriam Bell is hired to help look after the children of the attached orphanage, which I believe takes place in the 1950s, as previously mentioned. We have a new volunteer to look after the children and take care of things around the sanctuary, Sister Bell. She came highly recommended by the main office in Hartford. Bringing her in marks the completion of staffing the church after all these years. We've received clearance to move in a new group of children, 3 next week and another 3 sometime next month. However, I will asterisk this entire timeline that I just came up with John's apparent birth date, which completely messes up everything. I kind of wish I never saw it. According to the Faith Wiki, John was born in 1953, as it was apparently confirmed by the dev that John Ward is the same age as the actor who played Damien Karras from the classic horror film The Exorcist, this being the character John Ward was originally inspired by.
Now, if John was indeed born in 1953, then the events of Miriam Bell at Snake Meadow Hill would have to have been in the late 60s, early 70s. Or, here's another crazy theory for you guys to decide in the comments. As we know, in the basement of Snake Meadow Hill Church, time doesn't change. It stays at 2 AM. And because of this, John and Lisa are actually 10 to 15 years older than they appear, as they were down in the basement for that long during the preparation ritual, which I will come on to later. Now, with that annoying contradiction out of the way, let's continue. Now, these new children that arrived at Snake Meadow Hill Church, we now know two of them are John and Lisa. The colours of characters, like in Five Nights at Freddy's, it's very important to the story, which makes John's nightmare of the incident, basically the whole of Faith Chapter 2, much more personal to him than we all originally thought. So what took place when John and Lisa were there were Faith Chapter 2's prologue notes 3 to 8 in what is described through a staff worker's notes of Miriam Bell's strange behaviour. Now, keep in mind that she is, at this point in time, a member of the cult and had the second death performed on her. Though I assume, like Amy in the true ending of Chapter 3, she is able to hide the portal to hell that's on her face. Otherwise, I don't think they would have been too comfortable with her working there. Now we come to the children, and some amazing news is that some of the notes have been retconned. Thank you, Erdorf, thank you, my brain really needed this. When previously the prologue notes of 5 to 7 referenced the two remaining children as twins, twins is now removed and or replaced with the word children. This further confirming that Lisa and John are the two remaining children of Snake Meadow Hill Church during Miriam Bell's time working at the church. John and Lisa have had to suppress the trauma that they experienced during the 1950s when, as an orphan, were brought to Snake Meadow Hill Church and taken into the basement by Miriam Bell, as seen by Father Clark and the detective that was investigating Snake Meadow Hill Church at the time. This suppression of memories, I believe, can be confirmed by the first note that John picks up from the developer Erdorf himself, which there is also a similar note at the start of Chapter 3, which gives us a clue into John's mind at the time. Have you forgotten already? The notes people leave behind seem to exist on the edges of memory. Pressing the escape key or the start button is a good way to remember what you don't realise you have forgotten. To remember what you don't realise you have forgotten. Whether through the trauma or the rituals that were potentially performed on them in the basement of Snake Meadow Hill Church, John, and probably Lisa too, forgot they were ever at Snake Meadow Hill Church. My theory is that because we have seen a number of endings in which John was converted into becoming a member of the cult, like the initiation ending of Chapter 3 and the death scene in the first battle with Gary, where John has the second death successfully administered on him, it makes the most sense that what happened to both of them in the basement is what was referred to as the preparation of the vessel. That's just something I came up with, by the way. If we take note 33 of Chapter 3 as a clue to this, it seems that another who already is a successful recipient of the second death consumes the new vessel, probably through the portal to hell, and the other side either accepts or rejects them. So 4 of the children were rejected as they were not fitting to receive the second death and were thrown back through and then killed. I say that because Tiffany was also a rejected vessel who was still alive, but afterwards a demon inhabited them. So if we go by this logic, it could explain how the spindly lady appeared as the final staff member was a rejected vessel as well. John and Lisa were also consumed through the portal to hell, but were deemed successful vessels for the second death, and so were returned unharmed. as husks. Now you're probably asking, but if that's the case, then why weren't they taken by the cult from the 1950s sort of onwards? Now this is sort of a tough question to answer, but let's speculate. I think since that time, they were always under intense watch from the cult. Lisa was likely offered accommodation at the apartments on the cheap so the cult could have a strong vessel sitting in their midst. She was obviously oblivious to this, but had similar nightmares to John that helped her remember at least some of what happened based on her notes to John at the start of chapter 3. And as for John, his interest in the church and faith in God would also play into the cult's hands, as they would appear to already have significant influence on the church in Connecticut at the very least. John and Lisa, whether born pre-1950s or not, were unfortunate results of the cult's influence in many areas of rural Connecticut. For the cult, it is easy for them to infiltrate various industries to meet their needs. If they need newborns to be able to make contact with hell, they run an abortion clinic. If they need children as future vessels for portals to hell, they have an orphanage as part of a church and can bring in as many parentless children as they need. Access to the church, they use the current members of the church as vessels to create influence such as Miriam Bell. I don't think we quite grasp just how far-reaching the cult's influence in this particular area of the United States there is, but I think this now gives us a pretty good idea. I also feel that John going with Father Allred to assist in the exorcism of Amy Martin was fated to happen. Something inside John, despite his forgotten memories of Snake Meadow Hill Church, was drawing him to demonic activity. Oblivious to why he had this specific interest, through Father Allred he found someone else who understood, and Father Allred found someone he could rely on for his top secret assignment that to me feels like it was kept from others at the church, including perhaps the cultists, which is why they potentially didn't know that John and Father Allred were going there. Lisa likely lived a lot of her life after Snake Meadow Hill Church in those apartments, unknowingly under the careful gaze of the cult, making friends with cult members such as Tiffany, oblivious to the activities going on, and then the nightmares began. It's also very hard to discern whether John and Lisa, potentially their relationship prior to what happened in that basement, allowed them to keep their memories of each other so that they always knew each other, if you like. Or, again, when the nightmares began, did they then realise, oh, I know Lisa Pearson, or I know John Ward, and then Lisa got into contact with John, and John knew who she was. I have a feeling that their relationship survived the memories that were taken from them, essentially. Whether triggered by more powerful and frequent demonic activity, something triggered those memories for her and for John when originally condemned by the cult, as if they never happened. What was that phrase? Damnatio Memoriae. The latest chapter in the Faith series, Chapter 3, as we know, opened up a Pandora's box of lore and unanswered questions that, despite 2 videos already out talking about it, as well as this one today, we have still not fully covered everything. And whilst I do intend to be dipping back into the Faith series, I will be looking at other game franchises and covering those in similar style videos, but I will always come back to Faith when there's topics to discuss and unanswered questions, as well as characters that require a bit more analysis. and whilst I had hoped that my Story of series would have a few more videos in its playlist by now, sadly this is only the third. In any case, it is heavily linked to the first video in the playlist and is incredibly intriguing. As you might guess from the title and the thumbnail, we are diving into the mysterious, shotgun-toting priest who has a severe disdain for demons. This, everyone, is the story of Father Garcia. Now, whilst Father Garcia has much more screen time than, say, Michael Davies through the 3 chapters, there is actually less concrete information on Father Garcia's backstory than we would like. So once again, we will be theorising and making assumptions that will hopefully fit the narrative of what we actually see and hear in the game. But let's break down what we do know for starters. Now, Father Garcia, of Hispanic descent, is a priest of the Catholic Church who we first see in the woods of Chapter 1, looking rather shifty. We know from the prologue of Chapter 2, and that's the intro to the game, not to confuse you with the prologue demo of Chapter 2 as mentioned in the previous video in the cornfield, that Father Garcia was keeping young Michael Davies captive for 3 months. For more details on him, check out the Story of Michael Davies video here. He was performing an exorcism on Michael Davies after taking care of him when he learned of his demon affliction. And on or around September 21st, 1987, he escapes Father Garcia's home and into the woods of Snake Meadow Hill Road, and Father Garcia goes after him, of course. Now, Michael's death at the hands of both John and Erdorf's 18-wheeler, I believe, are an important point to note, so remember this when we come to it later in the video. Father Garcia also appears in John's Nightmare of Faith Chapter 2 in the final boss sequence, coming in at the last minute to assist John in defeating the unspeakable inhabiting Miriam Bell. Now, what I think is really important to note here is the rotoscope cutscene. At first glance you might think it's not that different to any of the others, but it very much is, especially if you compare it to the original cutscene from Faith Chapter 2's original release. Here we have a more concrete look at Father Garcia, and admittedly it kind of just looks like John but with a grey outline. But why does it matter that the version in the full game is just an outline? The reason it was changed was to reflect John's current relationship with Father Garcia. We find out in Chapter 3 when Father Garcia comes in clutch at the boss battle again that this was the first time that they had met. So not in the church itself and not at any point between the events of Amy Martin's exorcism in 1986 or up until John's return to the Martin house in 1987 did they ever meet. John only knew Father Garcia through the letters Garcia had sent him. The letters we see are the ones relating to the cult and what John had to do to stop them. It is highly likely that letters were exchanged prior to the game's main events. I theorise that Father Garcia knew of the cult at the very least sometime before September 1987, maybe even prior to Father Allred's mission to exorcise Amy on September 21st, 1986. He has such a drive for destroying the demons and the cult. We see in the true ending of Faith Chapter 3, Father Garcia looking to recruit John to help him in the fight against the unspeakable. It's potentially why Michael Davies was put specifically in Father Garcia's care, as he is well versed in the demonic and the occult that he is likely one of the few that would succeed in saving Michael. Fortunately, that was not to be. Before I come onto that alternate ending, you know the one I'm talking about, I firstly want to bring up the importance of characters' colours in this game once again. We talked about it briefly in the last Faith video, however Father Garcia specifically is coloured in grey. He has a grey outline, moreover a dark grey outline. Now if you have as few characters as Faith does throughout the 3 chapters, let's face it, there's not too many, surely you would make the character colours as distinct as possible, right? To me that just seems logical. So why wasn't Father Garcia maybe a green, or a nice teal, or a brown? Why was he grey, when there is another key character of this story that is also grey? I'm talking of course about Father Allred. The fact that he is grey and Father Garcia is a darker grey, to me is a clear reflection of how John views him. Think about it. John goes out with Father Allred, someone who I'm of the opinion he looked up to greatly,
though we could be wrong on that, there's nothing concrete to back that up. He then returns to the basement after taking Bob and Cindy Martin away from Amy during the exorcism, only to find Father Allred dead, blood dripping from his eyes and positioned like an upside down cross to add insult to, well, death. We know how shaken John's faith was after the events of September 21st, 1986, as well as what happened 1 year later. His nightmare of Chapter 2, showing his cross as silver rather than gold, already showed his waning faith. But hope sprung anew. Letters from a Father Garcia of the church, not only believing him about his events, but knows enough about the cult himself, and more importantly has the conviction to go headfirst into the darkness to defeat them. Something John can certainly admire, and someone that would have helped him restore some of his lost faith. Another person he can look up to and can hopefully trust that his word is true and that he is not another false reality or bad actor. You could say he is a real father figure for John.
Make one more joke like that guy led you to my wisdom head blown off by my perfection shoddy people.
Okay, moving on. And finally, the endings for Faith Chapter 3, which show Father Garcia in two very contrasting lights. In both, he attempts to recruit John to help in his fight against the unspeakable. Picking Father Garcia for the true ending will get a super positive true ending with good meme fuel, and both of them driving off to continue the fight against the unspeakable. Father Garcia now has an ally with strength and conviction like his own, willing to go to any lengths to stop the cult, as he would do himself. We then see this rather desperate side of him come out in the alternate good ending, whereby if you make sure that Lisa is killed in the battle with Alu, John, despite stopping the profane Sabbath for now, Gary and the cult are still alive and the unspeakable will return. John has lost too much at this point and does not believe in himself, and his faith in God has been well and truly shaken to the point he cannot even continue to be involved in this fight. A rather fair justification given everything John has been through, especially now losing Lisa after what we learned about them in the last video. Watch that up here. He has failed to save those closest to him and those he wanted to help, but to Father Garcia, none of that matters. Look at this scene. Look at how unhinged he looks. This man is so desperate for help in the fight against the unspeakable that he is literally threatening John to help him. And if he doesn't, he'll kill him. And there's also a very good theory to back up why he certainly would take that shot. So on the face of it, we do just see what this cult has potentially done to Father Garcia. We do not know if he has lost anyone to the cult, but that's what it feels like. So one theory I had was that he cared greatly for Michael Davies, so much so that when he escaped and saw John shoot him and then get run over, that sent Father Garcia over the edge. Whilst he of course wanted John's help to stop the profane Sabbath, he would not forget what he did to Michael Davies. Garcia maybe thought that he could potentially recapture him and save him. However, whilst this is sweet and does kind of play into the father and son ending of Chapter 1, where if John shoots Father Garcia with the gun, Michael kills John, showing Michael's care for Father Garcia too, even in his chupacabra form, if you like. And I actually really like this theory. Comments, though, had another theory that I also really liked, and it was mentioned multiple times, which is all to do with the battle with Alu in the apartments. So in this route you have to kill Lisa whilst John is still possessed by Alu. So with that in mind, Father Garcia potentially thinks that some part of the demon still remains in John, and he is going to do to John what he did to Michael, except this time after locking him in the basement he will succeed in exorcising the demon, or if that fails, shoot him. So there we are. There is the story of Father Garcia, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do drop a like and subscribe and comment what other games you'd like me to discuss in these video essay style lore videos. I'm very interested to see what game franchises you want to see. I'm diving back into the Resident Evil universe,
and also looking at some older games that I feel need a light shining onto them again. So do check out some of my other videos that I've done in this Understanding the Game playlist that I've got here for you guys. Anyway, thank you guys so much. As always, have yourselves a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.